Hello, and welcome to the May 2021 edition of Books Sandwiched In, sponsored by the Friends of Brighton Memorial Library. My name is Corey Yerkes, and I am Brighton's media librarian. As one of the librarians here, I was asked to review Jojo Moya's 2019 book, The Giver of Stars, about the Works Progress Administration's Packhorse Librarian Program in rural Kentucky in the 1930s. Like a good librarian, after I finished reading The Giver of Stars, I started to research more about the location, the program, and the discussions people were having about the book. I was intrigued when I found out that Jojo Moyes was actually accused of plagiarism by another author, Kim Michelle Richardson, who released a book about 4 months earlier than Giver of Stars called The Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek, which also takes place in Kentucky in the 1930s, and the main character is a packhorse librarian. After reading about the charges put at Moyes' pen, I decided to read Richardson's book as well. So I'm actually going to review both books. I think to start with, though, it's important to have some background information about what is happening in the books. So I'm actually going to start by showing a map of Kentucky. A lot of the information I'll be sharing is from a 1998 master's thesis I found by Jean Cannella Schmitzer for the University of Kentucky, Tennessee at Knoxville, called The Packhorse Library Project of Eastern Kentucky, 1936 to 1943. So as Sophia and the Golden Girls used to say, picture it, rural Kentucky in the 1930s. The mountainous region is in the eastern part of the state. And here's a view of Kentucky's eastern border. And here is Troublesome Creek, which is an actual place. Coincidentally, this area of Kentucky is also home to a small town called Yerkes, just west of Hazard, which my relatives have visited and said it was actually just a tiny post office and a couple of other buildings. A satellite view of the town on Google today shows a large strip mine just north of town. The people of Eastern Kentucky were mostly of English, Scots-Irish, Northern Ireland, Welsh, and German descent. They moved to the area due to the Revolutionary War soldier land grants, kind of like in this area, and because of the vast natural resources in the area, especially for hunting, logging, and mining. Their language, which is compared to a Shakespearean English, really follows the dialect of the Revolutionary War era, which, as isolated as the area is, caused for fewer changes in the language. The things their ancestors found important were music, like the fiddle, whiskey, and sewing, which are all highlighted in the two books. The topography of Eastern Kentucky is hilly, with the highest peak at 4,200 feet and most mountains at 3,500 feet and shorter. The mountainous terrain prevented the construction of the infrastructure needed for industries to succeed in the first quarter of the 20th century. Then as the 1930s hit, the country was in the middle of what it was later termed the Great Depression. Unemployment in Appalachia, which is the area from about Watkins Glen in New York State down to past Mobile, Alabama, was at 40%, with decreased mining in Kentucky due to the increased use of oil and gas and calls for unionization of the workers, major causes. Most remaining families relied on subsistence farming and logging, if not employed by the mines. Unemployment in the rest of the country was at 25%. In the 1930s, 63% of rural Kentucky had no access to libraries at the time, and 31% of the population was illiterate. Education was seen as a way to lift up the chances of the populace. Traveling libraries had actually started in 1897 through the efforts of the Kentucky Federation of Women's Clubs. They wanted reading materials that bettered society, such as educational text, classics, consumer knowledge, anything with a moral and physical lesson to be learned in the rural areas. These items were popular with schools, which, due to the limited tax base, often couldn't fund reading materials. 32 stations had been set up around the state, where 5,000 books and 100 crates circulated between the stations. However, due to the mountains on the eastern side of the state, these outreach efforts didn't reach the area. It was actually a private individual with a rich benefactor who first started to travel in eastern Kentucky's Johnson County. The women's clubs lobbied for the creation of the Kentucky Library Commission in 1909. 20 years later, as part of President Roosevelt's New Deal, in 1935, the Works Progress Administration was formed to put people, mostly men, back to work on public projects, building roads, architecture, and parks. Women's jobs often included sewing, working in schools, and fashioning books. And here are some actual pictures from the Works Progress Administration. The first one is a group of people working at lunch programs, the sewing projects. Here's a public worker getting his paycheck, and airport building down around Washington, D.C. The program also included the pack horse librarians. And here we see a librarian on her horse, and here is a librarian visiting someone in their home and reading to them. Smitzer's thesis stated, the administrative director of the WPA's education division reported that no other institution for adult education was more important than libraries. Learning would improve the earning power, the living conditions, the health, and the family life of millions. By 1939, Works Progress Administration library projects existed in 45 states, with 14,000 people staffing them, including 5,800 traveling libraries like bookmobiles and the pack horse librarians. Between 1936 and 1943, pack horse libraries served an area of 550,000 residents with 30 different counties with pack horse libraries. The librarians averaged 5,000 miles per month while visiting 4,000 families and 55,000 individuals. Librarians were paid to set up a library center, which was usually donated by local towns or businesses, and businesses or individuals paid for the utilities. Each library had a staff of 5 to 7 workers who were each paid $28 per month, with about 200 people working in the mountains of eastern Kentucky. They had to take books from the libraries all over their county on routes that were usually about 20 miles long. Many librarians rented horses needed to complete their journeys. Each librarian also needed to be able to read, to create scrapbooks, suggest materials to patrons, and to fill requests. They learned to mend and repair materials. Librarians were usually women, and they were paid by the WPA. Books were donated, sometimes coming in from all over the country, from groups and organizations, particularly PTA groups across Kentucky. In 2 months in 1936, over 7,100 items were collected. Once the items were received by the library, they were gone through to ensure that any materials that might offend mountain people were removed. If the residents lost trust in the library, the program would fail. They excluded magazines like Love Story, True Story, or those that were detective-based. They also didn't include chemistry or mathematics texts or anything in a foreign language. Instead, people were encouraged to donate items dealing with art, music, short stories, cooking, gardening, health, history, and inventions. Children's books, Bibles, the Ladies' Home Journal, Popular Mechanics were also the most requested items. Also popular were Reader's Digest, National Geographic, Parents Magazine, and Good Housekeeping. By distributing materials and information, librarians helped to dispel old wives' tales and myths. The pack horse librarian program ran until 1943, when in the middle of the war, they ran out of money. Residents didn't have any library service for 10 years until the Friends of Kentucky's Libraries got 6 bookmobiles to visit rural areas. Snitzer details in her thesis this anecdote from some borrowers. In one instance, a mother continuously declined service. Finally, she agreed to take some of the materials. On the librarian's next visit, the woman greeted the carrier enthusiastically, and she said, "They're all nice, clean stories." From then on, she was a regular, loyal patron. At some stops, groups of 30 or more people would be awaiting materials. Even those who could not read enjoyed looking at picture books. In 1937, 4 True View viewers and film were added to the collection, and they were extremely popular in giving patrons more of a world view. There was a higher demand for materials than what the libraries could supply. Each family was limited to 3 items. School children would often share their items with each other in order to have more variety in their materials. To supplement the stock, the librarians often created scrapbooks from ruined books, newspaper and magazine articles, pictures, local recipes, local remedies, and living tips. These too were loaned out. And here's actually a couple of pictures of what those scrapbooks look like. This one is a bunch of recipes that are pasted into a notebook. Here's some pictures of birds. Here is a story that some librarians made up to go along with the pictures they cut up. These are all at the FDR Library now. With little to no resources for running a library, library staff had to get crafty. They used cheese boxes for card catalogs, prune boxes for sorting, license plates for bookends, broom handles for newspaper racks, and an auto jack for pressing books that were being repaired. So with that background information, let's look at the books. I'm going to try not to give too much away if you haven't read them yet. The Giver of Stars by Jojo Moyes, which of course is backwards on the screen, tells the story of Alice, an English woman who fell in love with a Kentucky mine-owning native and emigrated to the United States. Once she arrives in the United States, her dreams of a romantic life in a new land with her husband fall flat. She is seen as an outsider by the town, so she has few friends, and her husband is subordinate to his father, who lives with them. In order to find a place to belong, Alice volunteers to work with the new library in town and deliver books via horseback to the mountain people, a task which her new family disapproves. As a librarian, she starts making friends with the other library staff, the independent woman Marjorie, the young physically challenged Izzy, the scrappy Beth, the recent widowed mother Kathleen, and Sophia, a Black librarian. Woven throughout the story is the mysterious death of a mean mountain man who tried to attack one of the librarians, and an undertone of a vendetta of a shady businessman who rules the town. Together, the librarians work to change how the locals view books, learning, and equality. I couldn't help but think as I was reading this story that there were some similarities to Louisa May Alcott's Little Women. Moyes used literary quotes to start and foreshadow each chapter, and she herself used a few from Little Women. Little Women, of course, explored the roles that women were expected to follow in the Victorian age, but even 75 years later, females were still put into certain slots. The character Marjorie doesn't want to be held back by marriage, just like Jo in Little Women. Alice also emulates Jo in that she felt stifled by her life and needed to find herself. And in the course of doing that, she found someone to love her just as she was. Izzy is like Alcott's Beth in that she is limited by her physical condition, but music allows her to free herself from those constraints. And Beth is the younger, annoying little sister like Little Women's Amy, who yearns to see the world. The other book, The Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek, is the story of Cussy Mary, a packhorse librarian who is a member of the Blue Families of Kentucky. When I first heard about this book, I was intrigued as I had never heard of the Fugates. The Fugates were a family who, due to recessive genes and later inbreeding, had a blood disorder which caused their skin to look blue. In real life, in the 1960s, a medication was found to thin the blood and the blue skin disappeared. In The Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek, the author changed some timelines to better work with her story. Anyway, in this story, we learn that Cussy Mary is an old mage at the ripe old age of 19. Her widowed father, a miner plagued by black lung, is trying to find her a husband before he dies. Cussy Mary enjoys the freedom and respect she gets from being a bookwoman and does not want to marry. Throughout the story, we learn about the different classes of the hill country and how Cussy Mary is looked down upon for being colored. The story's themes transcend time, particularly in the area of unions, race, and police brutality. Race is more involved in the plot of The Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek than in The Giver of Stars, as our description of folkways and home remedies. This book is definitely the grittier and the sadder of the two and seems more honest about the levels of poverty, living conditions, and social norms of the times. What I liked about the books. I enjoy historical fiction and enjoyed the period and the settings. The books kept my interest, and the romance wasn't so pervasive as to steal from the rest of the storyline. I enjoyed that both books made me curious enough to stop reading in order to look up places, customs, and culture on the internet. What I didn't like. In The Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek, during the last few chapters, the main character had a lot of life changes occur all at once. It felt like the author was trying to wrap up all of the loose ends all of the sudden, and the pacing didn't fit with the rest of the story. I'm also not a fan of books that contain animals who are hurt, injured, or die. And that's my PSA message. The Giver of Stars. We were never told why Alice's husband didn't want to be intimate with either of his wives. Some possibilities are alluded to, but it never comes out to say what the real reason was. And I kind of wanted that closure. While reading the books, I was reminded of the Catherine Marshall book, Christie, which, although set about 25 years earlier in nearby Tennessee, was very similar in setting and characters and even storyline. Storms plaguing travel, evil mountain men threatening women, poverty, poor health and folk remedies, starvation, some people very eager to learn, others leery and even shunning books and learning. People from away are on a mission, which literally occurs in Christie, in order to save and make better living conditions of the mountain people. The authors. According to her website, Jojo Moyes is a novelist and a journalist. Her books include the bestsellers Me Before You, After You, and Still Me, The Girl You Left Behind, 1+1, and now Me Before You has sold over 14 million copies worldwide and was adapted into a major film. Ms. Moyes lives in Essex, England. From the information on her website, Kim Michelle Richardson is a New York Times bestselling author who has written 4 works of historical fiction and a bestselling memoir, The Unbreakable Child. Her latest multi-award-winning novel, The Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek, has earned a 2019 Library Reads Best Book, a 2020 PBS Reader's Choice Book A Million Best Fiction, and is an Oprah's Buzziest Book Pick. Kim Michelle lives with her family in Kentucky. So, was Moyes' book a plagiarization? What the books have in common. Each story is about a Kentucky pack horse librarian and how being a librarian gives each main character confidence in herself. In each book, there's a mysterious death of an evil mountain man. Each novel addresses racism, which, given that they take place in the South in the 1930s, is not a unique situation. However, both of the main Black female librarian characters have to leave the towns in which the stories are set in order to have a better life. Both main characters fall in love with a man who loves literature. Each lead character suffers physical abuse by an older man. A theme throughout both is that of misogyny, especially in that fathers and husbands rule the households and can physically abuse and or force women to do their will. However, after reading both of the books, I felt that they were totally different stories. The Giver of Stars focused more on the storyline about an innocent person being accused, as well as familial relationships and emotions. Whereas the book Woman of Troublesome Creek seemed to do more with the Blue people of Kentucky, the folk remedies, and the history of the people and the land. The Giver of Stars was more of a romance that seemed like it could have been placed almost anywhere in time, whereas the book Woman of Troublesome Creek felt tied to its setting and time period and contained nuances of the region, which, considering that its author was born in the area and Jojo Moyes is from England, makes sense. Both books are good reads, but the book Woman of Troublesome Creek seems more authentic. If you haven't read these titles, I hope you do. If you have read these titles and would like more to read about this region, I recommend Christie by Catherine Marshall, Over Plain Houses by Julia Frank, The Truth According to Us by Annie Barrows, and The Librarian of Boone's Hollow by Kim Vogel Sawyer. Join us next month for Blue Highways, A Journey into America by William Least Heat Moon, a classic about the author's journey through America's backroads and small towns. Reviewed by William Bill Forbes, Associate Professor of Geography at Stephen F. Austin State University in East Texas and former forester in Oregon. Thanks for watching this edition of Brighton Memorial Library's Book Stand with Chin. More videos from this year's series are available on our YouTube channel under Brighton Memorial Library. Have a good day.